What you are about to hear is not a summary of some distant conflict that happened weeks ago. This is the live operational picture as of right now, on the morning of the 29th of June, 2026, in the Strait of Hormuz. After 96 hours of relentless strikes, retaliatory missile barrages, tanker attacks, emergency diplomatic cables, and one single Truth Social post from the President of the United States that stopped the entire world mid-scroll, forcing every intelligence agency on the planet to urgently update their threat assessments. President Trump posted the following, and I will read it exactly as written because the language is deliberate and its weight must not be softened. There may come a point when we are no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job that we very successfully started. If that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. 7 words at the end of that sentence. The Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist, not weakened, not contained, not facing consequences, will no longer exist. From the sitting President of the United States, posted publicly for the entire world to see. Roughly 4 hours after that post went live, both sides quietly agreed to stand down and reconvene for emergency technical talks in Doha on June 30th. You can draw your own conclusions about whether those two events are connected. Let us rewind 96 hours, because the sequencing here is everything. Without understanding the exact order of events, the current moment makes no sense. This is where the story truly begins. To fully understand the gravity of the current situation, we must first examine the broader strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz and reconstruct the precise sequence of events that led us here. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another waterway, it is one of the most critical choke points in global energy security. Nearly 21 million barrels of oil pass through this narrow stretch of water every single day, representing approximately 21% of global petroleum consumption. Control over this strait means leverage over the world economy. For decades, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has treated it as their private revenue stream, using a combination of fast attack boats, mines, and drones to enforce what amounts to an informal toll system on commercial shipping. Now, let us rewind 96 hours and follow the timeline carefully. On June 25th, the IRGC launched a one-way attack drone that struck the Singapore-flagged cargo vessel MV Ever Lovely as it exited the strait along Oman's coast. This was not a random act in contested waters. The ship was traveling through the southern Oman-facilitated safe corridor, a protected routing specifically established under a recently signed Memorandum of Understanding designed to allow commercial traffic to bypass traditional IRGC-controlled northern routes. Iran's own negotiators had agreed to respect this corridor, yet they attacked a vessel operating strictly within its boundaries. CENTCOM responded swiftly with targeted strikes against Iranian military sites. Through back-channel communications, Iran was given a clear ultimatum: stand down immediately or face further consequences. The message was direct and unambiguous. Iran did not stand down. Just 2 days later, on June 27th at approximately 4:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the IRGC launched another attack drone that successfully struck the Panama-flagged tanker MT Kokuku. The vessel was carrying more than 2 million barrels of Qatari crude oil bound for Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates. This attack was particularly provocative because Qatar had played a key mediating role in establishing the Safe Corridor Agreement. Iran had effectively used the ceasefire window created by their own diplomatic commitments to strike a tanker carrying oil from the very nation that helped broker the deal. This was not an isolated rogue incident. It raised a fundamental question that continues to haunt analysts. Either the IRGC was deliberately undermining the civilian government's diplomatic efforts, or hardline military factions were operating with significant autonomy from Tehran's political leadership. Both scenarios are deeply alarming. CENTCOM's response was swift and devastating. Within hours, a coordinated 1-0 target strike package was executed over a 90-minute window. The targets included surveillance infrastructure, communication nodes, air defense systems, drone storage facilities, and mine-laying capabilities primarily concentrated on Keshem Island and the Sirk region. These were not random sites. Many were fortified positions that had long served as the backbone of IRGC's maritime harassment operations. Two of the targets were brand new IRGC constructions built during the supposed ceasefire period. American intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets had detected and neutralized them before they could become operational. No American aircraft were lost. The precision and speed of the operation sent a powerful message about current U.S. capabilities in the region. Then came the moment that changed everything. On the evening of June 27th, President Trump posted his now infamous message on Truth Social. The language was unmistakable. Less than 4 hours later, both sides agreed to de-escalate and prepare for emergency technical talks scheduled in Doha on June 30th. The sequencing is deliberate and revealing, a blatant violation of a signed maritime agreement, a devastating U.S. military response. A direct presidential threat to the very existence of the Iranian regime followed almost immediately by a request for negotiations. This is the operational reality in the Strait of Hormuz as we stand today. To truly appreciate what happened on the night of June 27th, we must examine the architecture of the American strike package in detail. This was not a simple retaliatory raid. It was a meticulously coordinated multi-domain operation that showcased the current supremacy of U.S. air power in contested environments. The strike began with the F-35 Lightning II, both the Air Force's F-35A and the Navy's F-35C variants. These fifth-generation stealth aircraft serve as the vanguard. Their greatest advantage lies not just in low observability, but in sensor fusion. The F-35 aggregates data from its own radar, electronic warfare systems, data links from other platforms, and satellite feeds into a single, coherent picture that the pilot sees long before any adversary radar can establish a track. In the words of experienced pilots, the F-35 sees everything before anything sees it. Against IRGC radar sites and air defense nodes on Qeshm Island, the F-35's mission was surgical. Find, fix, and finish before the enemy could react. It effectively blinds the enemy's security cameras before walking through the front door. By the time Iranian operators realized they were under attack, their facilities were already being destroyed. Following closely behind the F-35S were the F-16CJ Wild Weasels, the dedicated suppression of enemy air defenses SEAD platforms. For months, these aircraft have been flying this exact mission profile against Iranian air defense infrastructure. They know the terrain, the radar emission signatures, and the behavioral patterns of IRGC operators under pressure. Armed with high-speed anti-radiation missiles, HARM, the Wild Weasels deliver a brutally simple message. If you turn your radar on, that radar becomes the weapon that kills you. The HARM rides the electromagnetic emissions directly to their source. Turn it off and you're blind. Turn it on and you're dead. Neither option allows effective defense against the incoming strike package. The final layer of the operation belonged to the F-15E Strike Eagles, carrying massive payloads of precision-guided munitions. These aircraft delivered the GBU-72, a 5,000-pound bunker buster with dual-mode laser and GPS guidance. This dual-mode capability is operationally decisive in contested airspace. If a pilot must break laser lock to perform defensive maneuvers against incoming threats, such as the jellyfish-shaped drone swarms reportedly observed in return corridors, the GPS guidance ensures the weapon continues the correct coordinates. What makes the F-15E particularly valuable, even alongside fifth-generation platforms, is the human element. With a pilot in the front seat maintaining visual situational awareness and a weapons systems officer in the rear managing sensors and targeting, the Strike Eagle provides a combination of man and machine that pure stealth platforms cannot fully replicate. The entire 1-0 target package was executed in just 90 minutes. Every site was leveled. Surveillance infrastructure, communication nodes, drone storage facilities, mine-laying platforms, and newly constructed IRGC positions, all neutralized with 0 American aircraft losses and minimal collateral damage. This level of precision reflects months of persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR, work by CENTCOM. Iran has had 4 months to adapt, relocating systems, hardening sites, and studying American tactics. They have deployed drone swarms, improved electronic warfare, and attempted to conceal assets among civilian maritime traffic. Yet on that night, none of these adaptations proved sufficient. The suppression architecture worked, the stealth penetration worked, the precision ordnance worked. The ISR picture was complete enough to allow simultaneous strikes across geographically dispersed targets with no fratricide. This operation was not merely about destroying physical targets. It was a demonstration of operational tempo and dominance. It showed that even after months of active conflict, CENTCOM retains the ability to penetrate Iranian defenses at will and impose its will on the battlefield with overwhelming technological and tactical superiority. The footage that later emerged, radar sites vanishing in brilliant flashes, drone storage facilities reduced to smoking craters, serves as a stark reminder of the current military reality in the Persian Gulf. While Iran continues to boast about its crushing responses, the operational gap between rhetoric and reality has become impossible to ignore. This is the new standard of American power projection in the region, and Admiral Tangsiri's forces are now forced to operate under this reality. While the military dimension of this conflict is impressive, the real story lies deeper within the fractured power structure of Iran itself. At the heart of the current crisis is a fundamental question that few analysts dare ask openly. Who is actually in charge in Tehran right now? The most significant name emerging from signals intelligence and open-source reporting is Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, commander of the IRGC Navy. This officer has repeatedly asserted Iranian routing authority over the Strait of Hormuz, even after the Memorandum of Understanding was signed. He represents a powerful faction within the IRGC that views control of the strait not as a national security issue, but as an institutional lifeline. The IRGC Navy's ability to tax, threaten, and extort commercial shipping through the strait generates an estimated $90 billion per year in informal revenue. This is not abstract institutional interest. It is cold, hard cash that funds operations, buys loyalty, sustains patronage networks, and grants the IRGC Navy significant independence from Iran's regular government budget. Asking Admiral Tangsiri and his forces to surrender control of the strait is equivalent to asking them to voluntarily dismantle their own primary source of power and wealth. This creates a structural conflict between two centers of authority in Iran. On one side stands the civilian diplomatic apparatus led by figures like Foreign Minister Araghchi, who have been engaged in back-channel negotiations with the United States since February. On the other side is the IRGC Navy, which operates with considerable operational autonomy and has clear incentives to sabotage any agreement that threatens their economic empire. The events of the past 96 hours perfectly illustrate this tension. While civilian negotiators were working to establish a safe corridor, the IRGC Navy conducted deliberate attacks on vessels operating within that very corridor. This was either a coordinated strategy by a unified Iranian command, or more likely a rogue military faction deliberately undermining civilian diplomatic efforts. Both possibilities are dangerous, but the latter may be more destabilizing in the long term. After the June 27th strikes, Foreign Minister Araghchi publicly stated that Iran would exercise sole management and oversight of the Strait of Hormuz for the next 30 days. This extraordinary claim made by a civilian official during active negotiations suggests the government is attempting to project strength to its hardline domestic audience while simultaneously seeking de-escalation with the United States. It is classic Iranian dual-track behavior born from internal weakness rather than strategic cunning. The elimination of Iran's supreme leader on the first day of this broader conflict has left a dangerous power vacuum. Multiple factions are now competing to fill that void through displays of strength. The IRGC Navy in particular appears determined to prove its continued relevance and protect its financial autonomy. Every drone attack on commercial shipping is not merely tactical harassment, it is a political statement directed as much at Tehran as it is at Washington. This internal fracture represents both a vulnerability and a danger for the region. It is a vulnerability because Iran cannot coordinate a coherent, unified military escalation against American interests. The different factions are too busy competing with each other. Yet it is also a danger because a rogue commander like Admiral Tangsiri does not need strategic coherence to create chaos. He only needs operational capability and institutional protection, both of which he currently possesses. CENTCOM planners understand this dynamic perfectly. Their current strategy of surgical strikes against IRGC Navy infrastructure exploits this very fracture. Each successful strike degrades Tangsiri's operational capacity while avoiding actions that might force Iran's fractured factions to unite against a common enemy. The central paradox of the current moment is this: the greatest threat to stability in the Strait of Hormuz may not be Iran's strength, but its internal weakness and the desperate attempts by powerful military economic factions to preserve their privileges in a changing strategic environment. This is the uncomfortable truth that underlies every drone strike, every diplomatic statement, and every calculated escalation we have witnessed over the past 4 days. Here is where I must speak directly and personally. After carefully analyzing the sequence of events, the military exchanges, and the diplomatic signaling over the past several days, I have come to a sobering conclusion. The most dangerous factor in this crisis is not Iran's military capability, but the profound fracture within its own command structure. What we are witnessing is not a unified state executing a coherent strategy. We are watching a fractured regime where different power centers are pursuing contradictory objectives in real time. The civilian negotiators in Doha are desperately seeking an off-ramp, while Admiral Tangsiri and the IRGC Navy appear determined to protect their $90 billion empire at all costs. This internal contradiction is the true story behind the seemingly erratic behavior we have observed. The mainstream media, in my view, continues to miss this central point. They still frame the conflict as a traditional state versus state confrontation between Iran and the United States. This is a dangerous oversimplification. Iran today functions less like a cohesive nation-state and more like a collection of competing power centers operating with varying degrees of autonomy. The elimination of the supreme leader early in this conflict created a power vacuum that no single faction has yet been able to fill. This is what makes President Trump's 7-word declaration, "The Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist," so significant. It was not merely a threat against the Iranian state. It was a direct challenge to every faction currently fighting for dominance within that state. It forced every player in Tehran to confront the possibility of total collapse if the current path continues. From my perspective, the real blind spot in Western analysis is the persistent underestimation of how deeply economic interests drive IRGC behavior. This is not primarily an ideological struggle for them. For Admiral Tangsiri's network, the Strait of Hormuz represents a self-financing empire. Surrendering control of the southern corridor is not just a diplomatic concession, it is an existential threat to their institutional survival. This explains why they continue harassment operations even during supposed ceasefire windows. I believe we are seeing a classic principal agent problem on a massive scale. The civilian leadership in Tehran may genuinely want de-escalation, but they lack the authority to fully control the IRGC Navy. Meanwhile, the IRGC Navy understands that once commercial shipping normalizes through the southern route, without paying their informal tolls, their leverage will erode permanently. This internal fracture creates both opportunity and risk for the United States. The opportunity lies in the ability to conduct precision operations that degrade IRGC capabilities without triggering a unified Iranian national response. The risk lies in the potential for a rogue actor to trigger an uncontrolled escalation that even Tehran cannot contain. In my assessment, the 7 words from President Trump have accelerated the internal power struggle within Iran. The civilian faction is now under immense pressure to deliver a meaningful agreement in Doha, while the hardliners are doubling down on demonstrations of strength. This tension cannot continue indefinitely without resolution, either through a decisive internal consolidation of power or through external forces imposing a new reality. The coming days in Doha will not merely be about negotiations between Washington and Tehran. They will be a test of whether any faction in Iran still possesses the authority to speak for the entire regime. This is the uncomfortable strategic reality that most commentators are still refusing to acknowledge. Looking ahead, I see 3 plausible scenarios for how this crisis may unfold in the coming weeks. Each carries different risks and implications for the region and the global economy. Best case scenario, low probability. The civilian leadership in Tehran manages to exert sufficient control over the IRGC Navy during the Doha talks. A credible framework is established that allows commercial shipping to safely use the southern Oman corridor. Admiral Tangsiri's faction is either brought into line or sufficiently isolated. The United States agrees to limited sanctions relief in exchange for verifiable de-escalation and IAEA access. oil prices stabilize, and the immediate threat of major conflict recedes. This outcome requires the civilian negotiators to demonstrate real authority they have not shown in recent months. Worst-case scenario, medium probability. The IRGC Navy continues its harassment campaign regardless of what is agreed in Doha. Another major tanker incident occurs, forcing the United States to expand its target list beyond military infrastructure to economic assets. President Trump's warning about the Islamic Republic ceasing to exist moves from rhetoric to operational planning. B2, strikes on hardened underground facilities become likely. Regional conflict widens. Oil prices spike dramatically above $150 per barrel, and global markets enter a period of severe volatility. In this scenario, internal Iranian fractures deepen rather than heal, potentially leading to unpredictable power shifts inside the country. Most likely scenario, high probability, my base case. We enter a prolonged period of managed but intense low-level conflict. The Doha talks produce a fragile, vaguely worded agreement that both sides interpret differently. The IRGC Navy reduces the scale of its attacks but continues sporadic harassment operations designed to raise insurance costs and discourage use of the southern corridor. CENTCOM maintains a high-tempo campaign of precision strikes, systematically degrading IRGC Navy infrastructure while avoiding actions that would force total Iranian national mobilization. This becomes a war of attrition focused on the Strait of Hormuz, with the United States leveraging its technological and ISR advantages to impose mounting costs on Admiral Tangsiri's forces. In this middle scenario, which I currently assess as most probable, commercial shipping gradually shifts toward the southern route as American protection proves reliable. The IRGC Navy's revenue stream erodes over months rather than disappearing overnight. Iran's civilian government survives but remains weakened, while hardline factions lose influence gradually. Oil prices fluctuate but do not crash the global economy. The critical variable in all scenarios is whether the civilian leadership can deliver a military stand-down that the IRGC Navy will actually respect. If they cannot, then even the best diplomatic language out of Doha will prove meaningless within days. My personal assessment is that we are likely to see a hybrid outcome: short-term de-escalation following Doha, followed by renewed low-level provocations within 30 to 45 days. The structural incentives for the IRGC Navy have not changed. Until their economic model is fundamentally broken or they are brought under firmer civilian control, the cycle of provocation and response will continue. The United States holds the initiative due to superior capabilities and clearer strategic objectives. However, sustaining high-tempo operations across multiple theaters while protecting global energy flows will test American strategic bandwidth. The next 72 hours after the Doha meeting will provide the clearest indicators of which path we are heading down. Pay close attention not to what is said in the official statements, but to whether tanker attacks cease and whether the IRGC Navy publicly acknowledges any new restrictions on their operations. The coming days will reveal whether diplomacy can tame the IRGC's economic empire or whether military pressure must continue until the balance of power in the Strait of Hormuz is fundamentally altered. The events unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz carry consequences that extend far beyond the Persian Gulf. What began as a regional maritime dispute has rapidly evolved into a strategic test with global ramifications. First and foremost is the impact on energy markets. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly 1/5 of the world's daily oil consumption. Even the current level of uncertainty has already caused fluctuations in global oil prices. A prolonged disruption or a significant escalation could push crude oil well above $150 per barrel, triggering inflationary pressures across developed economies and potentially derailing the current disinflationary trend. The Trump administration has demonstrated acute sensitivity to energy costs, which explains why current U.S. strikes remain surgically focused on military targets rather than broader Iranian economic infrastructure. Beyond immediate price spikes, the crisis raises serious questions about the long-term security of global maritime trade. Insurance premiums for vessels transiting the region have already surged. Shipping companies are recalculating risk assessments daily. If commercial operators lose confidence in the southern Oman corridor despite American protection, the IRGC Navy will have achieved its strategic objective without ever defeating CENTCOM militarily. This is economic warfare through perceived risk, a sophisticated and dangerous approach. The timing of this crisis also creates a strategic bandwidth challenge for American planners. While attention is fixed on Hormuz, Ukraine recently executed a major drone campaign involving 660 drones targeting Russian defense industrial sites in a single night. This convergence of two high-intensity conflicts illustrates the complexity of maintaining superiority across multiple theaters simultaneously. The United States must now balance advanced air operations in the Middle East with continued support for Ukraine's attritional campaign against Russian industry. On the geopolitical level, China and Russia are watching developments closely. China, as the largest buyer of Iranian oil and a major player in global shipping, has clear interests in keeping the strait open. However, Beijing has so far avoided direct involvement, preferring to let the United States bear the primary burden of securing maritime trade routes while quietly increasing its own influence in the region. Russia, already stretched by the war in Ukraine, benefits from higher oil prices, but risks losing a key partner if Iran's regime faces existential pressure. The long-term risk for the region lies in the power vacuum within Iran. If the current fractured command structure leads to further internal instability, we could see unpredictable shifts in Iranian policy or even the emergence of more radical elements. A weakened or collapsed Iranian state would create new security challenges across the Middle East, from Iraq to Lebanon to Yemen. Yet there is also a potential positive dimension. If the United States successfully neutralizes the IRGC Navy's ability to threaten commercial shipping, it would represent a significant victory for freedom of navigation, a core principle of international order. It would also demonstrate that persistent, precision military pressure, combined with diplomatic engagement, can reshape adversarial behavior even in heavily defended choke points. However, this success would come at a cost. Sustained operations require continuous investment in ISR assets, munitions, stockpiles, and carrier presence. The economic ceiling on escalation is real. Major strikes on Iranian power grids or oil facilities could reverse recent gains in global energy markets and trigger broader economic consequences. In my assessment, the current approach of calibrated pressure represents the most responsible path forward. It seeks to degrade the IRGC's capabilities while keeping the conflict contained. But this strategy demands patience, consistency, and clear communication between military and diplomatic tracks. The world is watching to see whether the upcoming talks in Doha represent a genuine turning point or merely another pause in a longer cycle of confrontation. The implications extend well beyond oil prices and tanker routes. They touch upon questions of American credibility, the future of the Iranian regime, and the stability of global energy security in an increasingly contested world. The Strait of Hormuz has become the focal point where military power, economic interests, and political fractures converge. How this crisis is managed in the coming weeks will shape the strategic landscape of 2026 and beyond. As the dust settles over the Strait of Hormuz on this morning of the 29th of June, 2026, one thing is clear. We are witnessing a pivotal moment in modern geopolitical history. 10 Iranian military installations no longer exist. A major oil tanker was struck in a supposedly protected corridor. A U.S. president publicly declared that the Islamic Republic of Iran could cease to exist. And emergency talks are scheduled in Doha that may determine whether diplomacy can prevail over institutional self-interest. The central question remains unanswered. Does any faction in Tehran possess the actual authority to control the IRGC Navy and deliver a genuine, lasting stand-down? Or will Admiral Tangsiri and his network continue to prioritize their $90 billion revenue stream over national survival? In my personal assessment, the coming 72 hours will be decisive. If the Doha talks produce a framework that is then immediately violated by new attacks on commercial shipping, we will have our answer. The fracture within Iran is not just a diplomatic inconvenience, it is the defining strategic variable of this crisis. The United States currently holds the initiative. With superior technology, persistent ISR coverage, and demonstrated willingness to act decisively, CENTCOM has shown it can shape events in the Strait. However, sustaining this pressure while managing other global commitments will test American strategic endurance. To those watching this situation unfold, understand this: We are not witnessing random chaos. We are seeing the collision between a declining but still dangerous military economic empire and a superpower determined to protect freedom of navigation and global energy security. The B2S remain warm. The targeting packages are complete. The next moves in Doha will reveal whether reason or escalation will define the coming weeks. If you found this deep analysis valuable, I ask you to support the channel. Drop a like if you want more detailed breakdowns like this. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Which scenario do you believe is most likely best case, worst case, or the prolonged attrition path? Your predictions help shape future content. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss critical updates as this story develops. We will continue providing clear-eyed, unfiltered analysis of these fast-moving events. This is not the end of the story. It is only the latest chapter. Stay informed, stay vigilant. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next update.